remember one time the parents came to me and said, well, I want my kid to eat avocado. So I asked like, do you eat avocado at home? And they said, no.
Right. One thing would be to be open to alternative forms of communication. I think bridging that gap is really helpful and that reduces everybody's frustration.
Parents are very worried about whether their child is going to be communicate verbally or not. Pointing to a picture, that is communication. You have a battle to choose. Do you want them crying and screaming all the time? Or do you want them to be able to, select a picture or something like that in order to express what they need?
Everybody that I've had that makes the most success, it's not just me working in like an island. It's like a whole village of people. That's really where they make the most progress. It can't be done with just one discipline. It's very hard to do it that way.
I think that a lot of parents, if they can just hear this, it will change their mindset. I'd like to welcome Kelley. Thank you so much for joining me today. You are a speech therapist who also does feeding therapy, and you have worked with so many kids on the spectrum as well.
Yeah, that's correct. I do a lot of speech, but mostly I do feeding with neurotypical kids and kids on the spectrum as well.
That's wonderful. I'm excited to hear your story and share your expertise.
Yeah, I'm excited too. I always try to get the word out that there is help out there, there is hope out there. So I really try to use a lot of different channels to get that message across to parents and caregivers alike.
So, what got you into this work?
So actually, when I was in college, like most college kids, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I knew I had a passion for working with kids, but I just didn't know the scope of that. One class I took was just called Intro to Communication Disorders, and it really opened my eyes to the world of speech therapy. And kind of what that entailed. And I fell in love with it. And during those initial courses, I also learned there's quite a large medical aspect to it, like swallowing and feeding. And so I liked that it was kind of a combination and that I could practice in either way that I felt more comfortable in, like private practice or in a hospital if I liked that. Or kind of focusing on the speech or the swallowing. So I just liked that it was all encompassing and it kept me interested. And that's kind of what got me going.
Yeah, I have this question out of curiosity too.
Yeah.
Not all speech therapists does feeding therapy though.
No. So I mean, relatively newer to have speech pathologists do feeding. I mean, it's been happening for decades, but I think this is my personal opinion, why it kind of fell to us. We were already trained in all the anatomy and physiology of your mouth for talking and communicating. So it was a natural progression for us to then do swallowing, like post-stroke. Are you able to swallow this liquid safely or not? Things like that. And then as kind of the field of autism and behavioral feeding and sensory feeding got bigger and bigger over the past couple of decades, speech
Mhm.
pathologists were already seeing those kind of kids and they had like a background in swallowing. And so we kind of got merged into doing like feeding in general.
Mhm.
I would say 9 out of every 10 speech therapists really just do the speech part. It's harder to find one that does the feeding portion. A
Mhm.
lot of times, occupational therapists do the feeding part as well from a more sensory perspective, but there's a ton of crossover.
Gotcha. So at some point, did you do both at the beginning, or did you do the
Mhm.
speech therapy first and
No,
then-
I always did both at the beginning because I got educated in kind of that more traditional speech, a child who might not be communicating well by the age of 2 or something like that. But during that training, I was also learning the swallowing part and how to identify risk factors for aspiration and kind of the medical part. So I was always learning both. And then when I actually went to work at the hospital that I worked at, it was a new hospital in our community and which is really rare. It was really cool to be like, you know, be able to build a program.
Right.
Um, I was the only one there who could really do swallowing at the time. So then all the feeding kids got on my caseload. And so that's how I really kind of blossomed in the whole feeding world and sent me on my journey to do a lot more education and cross train with disciplines outside of my own. And that's what really got me to where I am now.
Very cool. So I just imagine that when you started out your practice, you will practically probably had some different approach, right? Than you
Mhm.
where you are now,
Yeah,
because
much different.
right
Mhm.
over the years we evolve. So tell me, what's the difference?
So I think one of the biggest differences is just I was able, in the setting I was in, I was able to learn from so many different disciplines, not just from a speech perspective. And like maybe a lot of speech, you come from a background of just oral motor, like, can this person chew or not?
Mhm.
And feeding is just so much bigger than that. There's a psych piece, which is anxiety based. There might be a sensory piece, which, an occupational therapist might have a lot of insight into that. There's the whole piece if your child does have autism and they need some regulation, like learning how to do that and learning how to be authentic with it and really sensitive to children that need regulation before you're going to just jump into doing feeding. So I think when I started, I was much more like, kind of just narrow thinking until I learned all these other approaches. And now I'm able to kind of use a lot of those different approaches when I see a child, what is the main concern with feeding? What's the main cause? And what approach would be best? And if it's out of my scope, then I will bring in somebody. If maybe some behaviors I see are really challenging for me to help the child regulate, I'll bring in someone who's more of a specialist in that area or somebody that maybe has more education with the anxiety piece. I have a background in it and I've learned a lot, but I'm not a therapist for solely anxiety. So I do a lot more in my practice now, referring out and getting help, which I think is just more beneficial for my patients.
Yeah, understandable. It's a
Yeah.
collaboration.
It is. That's the best way to do it. Everybody that I've had that makes the most success, it's not just me working in like an island. It's like a whole village of people.
Mhm.
And it's kind of like the parents are navigating all this and getting all this help, but the people who are helping the child are all communicating and talking with each other. That's really where they make the most progress. It can't be done with just one discipline. It's very
Yeah.
hard to do it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I see the same thing actually. So, what was the biggest hurdle you faced working with speech on kids with autism?
I would say with speech, I would say definitely one of the biggest hurdles is more of a education background or more of an education piece. So getting other providers actually and caregivers to understand that, speech is just, it's a way for me to communicate what I want and need to somebody else. That might look different to, to who you're talking with. So some people might be verbal, some people might have to use sign, some people might need to use a device, and one really isn't better than the other. And I think when I started, it was so much more a push for verbal. And of course, everybody wants their child to communicate verbally. I think that's just natural. We do. We want to have that. But I think one of the biggest hurdles is getting parents to understand that just because we provide an alternative like sign or a device, it doesn't mean their kids aren't going to be verbal. It's not like do this and then your kid will just rely on this and not want to talk. All
Right,
research shows that if we can get them to a point of where they can communicate and decrease some of that frustration, then they're
right,
at a place where they can learn and they can, do activities back and forth because they're not anxious or they're not upset about not saying like, I need a break or I'm thirsty or whatever it is. So
yeah, right. I think that's what I see too, is that parents are very worried about whether their child is going to be communicate verbally or not. But in
yes.
fact, all behaviors are communication, either
Oh,
like
yes.
nonverbal
Mhm.
communications or not, right? Even it's just
Exactly.
gestures, pointing to a picture, that is communication.
Yes,
Yeah. So I
it is.
sometimes be like, you have a battle to choose. Do you want them crying and screaming all the time? Or do you want them to be able to, select a picture or something like that in order to, express what they need? So,
That's a really good way to put it. I don't think I've voiced it to parents like that, but I'm going to use that because that is really good. That makes sense. I mean, you do have to kind of pick your battle, and in the end, we all have very, wonderful goals. But to get there, we sometimes have to go a different path than might have been envisioned, and I think that that's hard for,
mhm,
I'm a parent. That would be hard for me too. I'm not judging parents, but I think it's very hard to understand that.
right. Yeah. So how about with feeding therapy? What is the toughest challenge that you have seen?
So there's a lot of challenges with feeding. Feeding's hard. So it is very challenging. But I would say one of the toughest is what I used to do more, I feel, is just kind of jump in and, hey, this child might have autism, they're not eating, they have a lot of aversions to textures, and kind of just starting right away and not really appreciating that they need to get to a calm place to be able to work on
Mhm.
anything. So
Yeah.
I think that that's one of my strengths or one of my areas of weakness that is now more of a strength, but I'm constantly working on because I have to remind myself of that all the time. If they're very anxious about this food or they think you're going to force feed them or they think all these things, they're not going to be in a place where they can explore food for fun. That's just not realistic. So reminding me and myself and parents of that all the time is really important.
Right. And I see that kids with food selections, especially kids on the spectrum, some of them are very selective with foods, very, very
Very.
picky. Yeah.
Very. Yeah, and it's hard. I mean, we also have to take into account what the family typically eats, cultural differences, things that I might want for my family might not be appropriate for a family I'm seeing. And that might be kind of something that we have to talk about when we're initially setting goals. It's got to be something that is valuable for the family. If they never do a certain food, there's no reason to work on that. So
Right.
that's all part of it too. It's a big part of it.
Right. Yeah. So
Right?
I remember one time the parents came to me and said, well, I want my kid to eat avocado. So I asked, like, do you eat avocado at home? And they said, no.
Right. That's what I mean. What's happening? And I know that's a healthy food and a healthy fat, but it's you want to kind of go, you want your child to be seeing all the foods that they're going to eat before they're going to eat it and exposed to it and the smells and even back to like just going grocery shopping, right?
Mhm.
Just taking them and exposing them to that. I see some teenagers, I see a lot of teenagers actually, and some of them they're intelligent and they're great kids and I love working with teens, but some of them really they don't, if you're like even talking about what might be fun foods to try, they literally are like, well, I don't really know any vegetables or I don't know any fruits. Like they've just been so not exposed
Mm.
because of their selectivity or their aversion, the parents just haven't exposed it all.
Mm.
So that happens too.
Right. Getting them exposed to the
Yeah.
food, get them to see all kinds of food, all kinds of colors.
Yes,
Hopefully, they will pick interest in something.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So back to something that we just mentioned earlier. We were talking about parent pushing for vocalization,
hmm
right? But sometimes we have other alternatives for communications, for
hmm
example, gestures, um, picture exchange system,
hmm
or using a communication device. But then how can you tell what technique to try first?
Oh, so that can be really hard too. I think throughout my career, at least, I think there's always an underlying, push a little bit for verbalizations. Like every session is going to have modeling for that and some, breaking the sounds down really small just to try to get some of that copying of the sounds. So I think that that's always in there. But in terms of other types of communication, I mean, gesture, not really American Sign Language, but signs are a huge, huge, easy, effective way for kids to communicate. So we always try some of those. And then if we're going to go to like a more high-tech system, I try honestly to start with a low-tech system first. Just see if they're able to, which they will learn it, just, seeing how long it's taking them or what we need to do to get them to understand. I touch this, I get this.
Mm,
Or you know what I'm saying? So a
yeah.
lot of times we start with a low tech, it's not exactly PECS, but a modified PECS just to start
Mhm.
teaching them that process, waiting on their device to come. And then they'll sort of have that down. Like they'll understand, oh, I know this picture, I get it. When I touch this, picture that I had, now it's just on a device and I'm able to get that. So that's usually how we do it.
Mhm.
But yeah.
Yeah, starting out with low tech system. So
Yeah.
usually start out with like just pictures. So get them to understand the connection between,
Yes, the connection. That's a great word. Yeah, exactly.
right, a picture and a concept, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or simple signs like eat,
Yes.
water,
Mm-hmm.
more,
More open.
open.
Or yeah, or go, like I want to go, or I'm done, like I
Okay.
need a break,
Yeah.
right? So
Right.
those are important. Or
Mm-hmm.
like potty, if you're working on potty
Mm-hmm.
training. So those signs, and people don't really think of it, but itty bitties, like 9 months or 12 months, they do their own signs like wave, bye, and hi. Those are
Right,
signs. We all do them, or blow kiss, or you get excited, high five. Those are all nonverbal
right,
communication that we do for each other all the time.
right.
So that's kind of where we start too.
Yeah, I love that. And I spend a lot of time explaining this to parents too, because they are nervous and they're like, my kid is 3 years old and they don't even emit like a sound.
Yes,
Like, first of all, you teach them how to effectively communicate what they need to
yes,
reduce that anxiety and that frustration,
exactly.
right?
Mhm.
And then during the process of us, training them to understand words, we can have them mimic sound. And
Exactly.
yeah,
Yes. Yep.
right.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I
Even
have,
if it's not whole words, just mimicking mouth movements to the
mhm,
startup sounds,
yeah.
once you break through that and they understand, then a
Mhm.
lot of times the verbalizations come faster and quicker. But having that underlying communication piece where they're not frustrated and they know they're going to be heard and understood is
Mhm.
just so crucial.
Yes, I agree with you. I have this client, he just turned 4. So we started working with him last August. So it has not even a year yet.
Hmm.
He didn't even babble. All he did was he was emitting like the vocal stimming, like
Hmm. Yeah.
yeah, like that.
Yeah.
It took us several months, and just for the past 2 weeks, he started picking up so many words. He started the echoic,
Hmm.
skill, mimicking us, making words like lemon, sand.
That's so huge. That's
Yes, yes.
amazing.
And the other day, the mom came to me and she said, I was preparing dinner, and he said, feed me. I'm like, what? Oh
That's
my
so
God.
big. Wow, that is so cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Can you imagine
awesome.
how the parents feel?
I
I'm
mean, it's
oh
got to
my
be
God.
just the most amazing feeling.
Right. I got goosebumps. I'm like,
Yeah,
so
even
happy.
hearing your
So happy.
story. Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's so great.
Yeah. And what usually see is that once they acquire one or two words, it just comes out. It's like flush.
It like snowballs. That's what we discovered too. Like once they start just imitating some of those the sounds we're trying, any like pa, ah, like any of them. Once they start getting that that they understand that they're trying to communicate, then it kind of opens like a floodgates, and
Mhm.
that's when it all starts coming out.
Right. And do you also see too that once they have that echoic skill, then that's the early signs of speech. Do you?
Yeah, anecdotally, I feel like that is. I don't have the research for that, that I've seen, but that's what I feel happens all the time. It's that base that you need to then have it spill into actual back and forth communication.
Right. Yeah.
Hmm.
Okay. So for feeding, what is one specific approach that you have used that truly help kids?
There's a lot of approaches. Um, so one that I do talk to parents about that's easy for them is really what we spoke about earlier, just the exposure. What happens sometimes is, you'll put some pasta on your son's plate and there's a gag or something, or they don't want it, or they might yell or run. And then that's just removed because as parents, we don't want to see our kids upset. That's horrible,
Right.
right? But then that's never like done again. So if you do try it again in 6 months, it's new to them again. You're going to get the same thing. So one thing I do talk to them about is just that constant exposure. Like, okay, that happened that one time. That doesn't mean I'm not going to offer it when we have pasta on Tuesday. Even if you modify it, maybe
Mhm.
you don't have this white sauce on it. Maybe you don't have the meat sauce. Maybe it's just the noodle. That's fine. Like it's whatever they can do that's underwhelming, but you're
Yeah.
still pushing them. So you want them to feel safe, feel comfortable, but it's like a baby push, right? If we don't do anything, then that's not going to get them anywhere. If
Right.
we sit there and like, force feed them pasta and they're just completely and not in a place regulated where they can, that's not helpful either. You
No.
need to kind
Yeah.
of do baby steps of pushing, making sure they're still underwhelmed, but pushed enough where you're making some progress.
Gotcha. So let's say if they are trying to introduce like a new food item,
Mhm.
How many times do you have like a specific number? How many times you should introduce that same food?
Yeah, I would give it at least 10 times before you would decide if somebody really likes something or not. And I always tell parents, it's different if they're looking at it and judging it, saying, I don't like that based on my eyes, versus eating it and, oh God, I don't like that because I don't like the taste,
Yeah.
right? So we want kids to taste with their mouth, not their eyes. And a lot of them are so visually averse that it's just with their eyes. So that's one thing. The other thing I do a lot is like food chaining. So food chaining works really well. Um, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but a lot of parents kind of have heard of it, but don't utilize it, but it is really helpful. So like, for example, I had a little boy that they really want, he did peanut butter, and he would do like saltines, but that's about it. He would do like some French fries and stuff, but they really wanted him to do like peanut butter sandwich because they thought that'd be really easy. So we food chained from the saltines. We got a little bit of peanut butter on the saltines, so two liked foods that we
Mhm.
needed. And then we put the saltine on top to make it look like a sandwich. And we
Mhm.
started presenting that, which he did. He was comfortable. And then to chain to the sandwich, what we would do is toast bread, like really toasty, like crispy, like a saltine, and cut it the same shape. Started putting the peanut butter on that. So it's still a step to bread, but it's quite like saltine. And then started making that toasty bread bigger, more like sandwich size, and then decreased the toasting over time till it was bread with peanut butter and a sandwich. So it takes a while, but that's a much more, progressive and productive way to do something than just, oh my gosh, my kid, it's so frustrating. He
Right.
does peanut butter, he does saltines, but I can't get him to do a peanut butter sandwich. It's crazy.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. So takeaway here is gradual exposure,
Hmm.
right? And
Gradual
don't give
exposure
up.
and
Don't give up yet. Give it
don't give up.
time.
Yeah. And using foods they like to get new
Right.
foods. If they like peanut butter, they don't do any fruits. It's okay to use that as a conduit to like apples and peanut butter, banana and peanut, whatever it is. Like we
Mm-hmm.
want to use the food they like and
Mm.
the flavor profile they like and use that to introduce new. That's what we
Gotcha.
about.
Yeah. So it's like pairing. You pair one
Mhm.
highly
Yeah,
preferred item with something less preferred.
exactly.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
I get you. Thank you. I learned something
There
here.
you go. Yeah. And it's usually much less anxiety producing. And there's a ton of different food chains out there. Parents make them up. I make them up. Even if you get really creative or if you have the help of somebody who's done it more, you can even get like AI to create you some food chains. It's really kind of a really important piece that I think people forget. Like what you commented on, I want my kid to do avocado. Well, do they do anything like that flavor or like that color or like that consistency or
Mhm.
any? And if they don't, it's going to be a harder step than food chaining there.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
So,
gotcha.
yeah.
Cool. I remember I was working with yogurt with this little kid, and he was throwing a hugest tantrum ever. He was like, he was dramatic. So he,
Like end of the world. Yeah.
yeah, end of the world crying for a long time. And just by, him exposing to the presence
Mhm.
of the
Just the
yogurt.
visual side of it, right? Just the
Yeah,
visual. Hmm.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. But yeah, it took us a while. It took us 2 weeks for him to be able to eat the yogurt. But yeah,
Yeah. It's a
we had
love
to we
something.
had to start with like touching the yogurt on his lip.
Yeah, that's what we do. We start with just having it on the plate, maybe touching, maybe doing an empty spoon by the yogurt. So like not touching it, but still empty spoon. Then maybe
Mm.
little
Yeah.
tiny like tap around the yogurt and then putting it to our mouth and then, just some residue of yogurt on the spoon and kind of building like that.
Gotcha. Yeah, very
Mhm.
strategic, but
Yeah.
sometimes we
Yeah.
just have to break it down into the smallest step.
The smallest steps. Yep. The
Right.
very, very smallest steps. I tell parents a lot too, like if you think of it like a ladder, the
Mhm.
bottom, they're not eating. Oh, this is awful. The top, they're eating. It's great. I think what parents miss and what they come to therapy for is like all the rungs in between. So I think those rungs in between are like the baby steps that are often overlooked. And
Yeah.
that's why they come like to get help, right?
Yeah.
So the parents, and there's great parents, and I don't mean this to sound at all negative, but they don't know a lot of those steps in between. The
Right.
ones in the
Yeah.
middle are often the ones that are, it's either they're eating it or they're not eating it, and there's no in between. And
Right.
I think that's where people like you and people like me can be supportive is all those baby steps in between.
Exactly. They need the strategy because what
Yeah.
you see often is that they are in the two extreme. Either they give the kids the
Yeah.
food or they will never,
Mhm.
or they force feed, you know?
Yeah, and then we don't want that either. That's not, you might get the calories in, but it's awful for you, awful for them, and they won't
Right.
learn to love food. We want them
Right.
to be happy eating. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Mhm.
So when parents struggle at home, and I can understand it could be very stressful for them.
Yeah.
What
Mhm.
are some practical strategy that could help them with communication and speech? Feeding at
Yeah.
home.
So I would say one thing would be to be open to alternative forms of communication. I think bridging that gap is really helpful and that
Mhm.
reduces everybody's frustration. So
Yeah.
being open to that with speech and seeking help. It's, sometimes parents are kind of on a wait and see approach, but if you're that stressed, it's probably not time to wait and see anymore. It's time to get help.
Mhm.
Or the feeding piece, things that really don't work, like withholding foods they love, starving them. Like that just makes everybody miserable, just like the communication piece. So making sure they have their foods so they are comfortable and safe and happy, and adding that new food with their current foods is usually what's most effective until you get therapy or get help to do the harder pushes. So I still think it's really crucial for kids to have, like, say they really do mac and cheese, but oh my gosh, it's every day, all day, every meal, to not remove that and replace, but to have that and add. So then it can kind of be lower pressure, still happy, still getting calories and nutrition they need, but still pushing a little bit, even at home, to just introduce and expose that new food.
Gotcha. When do you suspect a kid has like the oral skill deficits that may affect their communication and their feeding?
So usually at the initial assessment, whatever you're getting assessed for, we'll just pretend feeding at this point. Um, I always assess chewing with food. I don't do it without any food. So, I'm not too concerned. If a child can move their tongue back and forth,
Mm-hmm.
that's fine. But if they're like not doing it with food, then it's a problem. So assessing the oral skills during eating is what's really, really important. And then we look in their mouth, we see, okay, is there something going on where their palate is really arched? Do they need to go to ENT? Do they need to go to a dentist? Are they reporting signs like maybe that parents aren't noticing that might be allergies internally, and they need to go to a GI to look for EOE or look for gastroparesis. So we make all those referrals out so we can treat any underlying medical issue, instead of just do therapy over that and then bang your head against a wall, right? We want to treat whatever is the cause.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One time, I remember that I saw this video on YouTube. A speech therapist, she was wearing gloves and she was putting her hand inside the child's mouth. I guess she was trying to move the tongue.
Oh boy. Yeah. I wouldn't advocate for that. So, you know, and
Is
I
it
know
a
I have a
practice
lot.
though? Like, is it a practice or is it
So I
something
do
that people make
feel,
up?
I do feel sometimes that if you aren't sure what's going on, or it's hard to, if you're having a really challenging session and that's the only thing maybe the child's allowing, sometimes I do feel that therapists will do things just to kind of make it look like we're doing something in therapy when it's really not effective.
Oh.
So, I think that might be why. That's my guess. But I mean, if you can picture, say your child is, I don't know, you want to teach somebody how to use chopsticks, just pretend, right? Okay, you'd have to teach that skill if that person wasn't good at it. So you wouldn't give them like a ball and be like, here, squeeze this, make your fingers really, really strong, or like do this really fast and make them really able to do
Right,
movements all the time.
right,
You take chopsticks, put it in their hands and say, this is how you do it, right? Same
right.
with feeding. You don't want to just teach a kid to like move their tongue side to side. You have to teach them there's food in your mouth. You have to bite, go get it with your tongue, move it across, and then do this. So
Mm-hmm.
if you think of it like that, I think it's a little easier for parents to understand. Or if you wanted your kid to play basketball, you're going to go shoot hoops with them, not go swing a bat with them. You
Yeah.
have to do the actual activity with it. Yeah.
So you shouldn't really put your hands into a child's mouth.
No, I mean, no, I have sometimes if somebody is I don't know if you've ever worked with a child who's like pocketing their food, like just won't
Yes.
here, right?
Mhm.
Which is very frustrating for everybody. I know it's like a hard one. Sometimes, we try all the other things first, but sometimes it can be helpful to, put on a glove and just go in and just move it over a little bit. Just here's your food, chew, move it over to like on top of their tongue.
Mhm.
I've done that sometimes. It's not something that's appropriate all the time,
Yeah,
uh, but more for food placement and where it should go versus just moving their muscles around.
I see. So just like a little prompt to get
Yeah,
them to move the
exactly.
tongue a little bit.
Yep.
Okay.
I can't. Yeah. I mean, when we're trying to phase that out, an easier thing to do or a more effective thing would be to put something sticky in there. Um,
Mm.
like thicken it up or like peanut butter or avocado, like something kind of sticky so it gets stuck over here. So naturally they're gonna like try to get it out with their tongue. So that's a
I
more
see.
effective strategy. But sometimes every once in a while we do use like a little prompt.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. So after all these challenging cases, share with me one of the success story that you have.
We got a lot of success stories. I work with a lot of older kids too. So this child didn't have autism, but he was very averse, very afraid of a variety of foods for different reasons. And this happens sometimes, he had some allergies to food. And when he was little, he was exposed, and it just made him scared of like all foods. So instead of kind of him learning, he rationally, okay, I'm only allergic to, peanuts, it kind of spills over into like food is scary. So that was kind of his concern. He was highly motivated, which is great, but he just literally could not bring himself to taste different things. So, we worked with him. There was no other GI problem. All his allergies were taken care of. He didn't have any oral motor issues, and he didn't even have a lot of like sensory concerns. He just was really scared. So we worked with that anxiety, and we did a lot of talk therapy. We worked with changing that mindset and that
Mhm.
thinking, and kind of, there's like usually people will say there's a little monster in my brain. I know it's safe for me to eat it, but that monster is saying like, no, you can't. It's not safe.
Mhm.
So we worked on the wording with that monster in his brain. We visualized, we drew, we did some visualizations of him eating, and we slowly got to the point where he felt safe
Mhm.
trying and tasting. And now I still see him like once a month just to catch up, but he is
Yeah.
eating everything. And he
Oh.
had a really supportive mom too. And
Mhm.
she would, kind of make a lot of different things that were sort of like his flavor profile, but a little bit outside the box, which
Mhm.
is kind of what we talked about earlier. And he is great and he loves eating. And his goal, he is learning Italian and he wants to go to Italy. So he wants to build
Mm.
like all over Europe. So he had a great motivator also. So yeah, so it was
Right.
really cool.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Hmm.
So you mentioned that visualization, changing the mindset. Is
Hmm.
it like the game changer for that case?
Yeah, that was a game changer. That's the game changer for a lot of older kids. If you picture a little child with autism and that's 3, that's going to be different. But if you're talking teenagers with anxiety, that's like the root of it. That's the key.
Hmm. I
Mhm.
feel like for teenager, because they have the understanding, they can communicate, it's
Mhm.
easier. But then for little kids, sometimes I feel like it's just so challenging with
It's
feeding.
so hard. It is. And we don't know what they're thinking. They don't always know what we're trying to do or what we're thinking. And you lose that communication piece, which I think makes it harder
Yeah,
when they're little.
right. Yeah.
I do.
So do you feel like speech and feeding therapy together, combined together, can help kids in ways that parents can't even imagine?
Oh yeah, for sure. And there are some people who kind of it depends. You can use your speech pathologist. That can be your feeding therapist also, but sometimes that's interesting bridge to kind of play both roles or have 2 different hats. So sometimes a lot of my kids will have speech therapy out somewhere else, but will come to me for feeding, for example, just to have 2 different third parties helping. It can be hard to like switch hats for the same kid.
Right? But do you see if they make improvement in speech, will they make improvement in feeding therapy as well, or vice versa? Or
Also, oh yeah, for sure. Because a lot of times that is set where okay, they're more comfortable, they're regulated, they're doing more things, they're able to have that back and forth eating or back and forth communication. And usually when you see one start to improve, you see the other one start to improve.
Mm-hmm.
So, I just had one mom comment that, her son, I'm not seeing him for speech, I'm seeing him for feeding, but he's done amazing. He was only drinking the bottle like 5 times a day. And he's now eating whole foods and chewing. He learned how to chew, he learned how to taste,
Wow.
like, all of it. But we had help of a really great BCBA too. So he was getting a lot of intervention, but she did comment, she said, as he's eating so much more, he's now talking so much more. And, mom said, I don't know if his muscles are just kind of doing things differently than they were when he wasn't eating anything,
Right.
or what's happening. But, and I can't speak to that either, but in terms of what actually is happening, but I do know that when one improves, the other tends to improve also. I don't know if you've seen that in your work.
I do.
Yeah.
I think that once they solve that communication piece,
Mm-hmm.
then it feels like everything else gets so much easier.
Falls into place.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Falls
it
into
does. The
place.
communication piece is key for sure.
Because as you mentioned, once they have that communication, they are more regulated, less
Mm-hmm.
anxiety, less distress.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of it. It's really important.
So how about the kids who are, because they don't eat a lot? So the parents would just give them, whatever they eat. They give them whatever. It doesn't matter whether it's junk food or not.
Mhm.
So have you seen that? And what is
Oh
your
yeah.
approach for that?
Yeah, so that's very common because as parents, as moms, we want our kids to get whatever calories they can get, right? So I totally appreciate that. I understand that. But on the flip side, there will be a little bit of kind of education behind hunger and how important hunger is. And even if we have to give them those foods that you feel are not the healthiest, and I'm not a judgmental person about food, I do not care. It's not up to me what you want to feed your kids. But if you're saying, he's just eating goldfish and cupcakes, whatever, and you're
Right.
giving that all day, then how we start is making sure the kid knows he's still going to have those foods. We're not removing anything, but setting it up in a way where, okay, this is your breakfast. And even if it's that breakfast, and then we're going to go 2.5, 3 hours without eating to build that hunger, and then it's your lunch, even if at first it's the same lunch, just to start getting on a little bit of a feeding schedule so
Mm-hmm.
we can get hunger cues back. Because the kids we see, their tummies are like this big. And if they're eating all day long, they're never going to be hungry. And that makes feeding
Right.
therapy 50 times harder. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. I had one kid before who would eat crackers all day long.
Hmm.
And that becomes a big issue because then it affects his digestive system.
Yeah.
And he was like either very constipated, and then
Hmm.
after that, the parents would give him Miralax, and then
Oh, it's like such a vicious cycle.
yeah, right. And then he would go bathroom like 5 times within a 2-hour window.
Ah, oh my
Right.
God. Yeah.
Yes. And feeding him was very, very difficult just because, crackers all day. And
Okay.
whatever we tried to give him, he was either like throw them on the floor or would throw a tantrum. So that was so hard. I feel like that client would benefit so much from your service.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I see all the time. That's like my everyday. It's hard. It is,
Yeah.
some of it too is just being understanding of the perspective of the parents. They're really stuck because they have to feed their kids, but they are stressed because it's just crackers all day. There's like a no-win situation, a no-win good way to do this. And I think it's really hard for parents emotionally. And it's
Right.
also something that's just gonna you can, if you're afraid of snakes, well, okay, I don't have to go be around a snake at all, right? But with eating, you have to eat. You have to present the the kind of thing that's making your child upset all day, every day for the rest of their life.
Mhm.
So it's overwhelming for sure.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So what would you do differently now for speech or feeding than when you started?
I think I would appreciate more the needs, like some of the sensory needs of my kids, and understand how much that helps to get them in a good place before I start doing any pushing or any work with them, and
Hmm.
getting building that rapport even before, like now what I do is the first couple sessions, I don't do any food, right? Which seems weird. You're going to feeding therapy, but all I'm doing is just making them understand that this is a safe space for them
Mm-hmm.
and having them comfortable with me. Not like then I'm just going to go jump and like give like force feed them, but I want
Right.
them to understand that this is a safe place. I understand what they need. And it's a slow approach as opposed to just, all right, feeding session one, here's your needs, right? So that doesn't really work very well.
Yeah, I feel like for a therapist, it's very easy to get into that mindset. Like, okay, I'm here and I have to make that child achieve whatever goal I set up
Yeah,
for. But it's
right.
always the case, right? You don't, sometimes you just can't go with the plan.
It can't go like that. You have to kind of do the work beforehand to make the work you want to do successful. And I think it is stressful as therapists too. Like, you know, it's hard. Like these kids are coming here because you're going to solve this problem. And if you're spending a month just kind of hanging out with this little guy that you know you're going to help, that's a hard mindset to get into. And I think it's hard to sometimes explain that as a therapist also.
Yeah, and explaining it to parents too, that
Yeah,
sometimes, to just be patient because we need that time to build a rapport with the kids.
right.
Yeah. You can't
Yeah.
really force a kid to do things because it can be traumatizing for them. They
It
are
can make it
living in the
worse. It's going to make it harder. Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
What is one speech exercise can parents do at home with their kids?
So speech or feeding? Either
Speech.
one? Oh, okay. So for speech, what I usually, and this is something I used to do a lot more often as well. I try to teach parents, when a little kid is learning how to talk, we want to try to remove as many questions as we can. Speech
Mm.
therapists are very much taught, like, here's some cards, what's this? What's this? What's this? Or what color? Or what color? Or how big? So I tell parents kids learn so much better from really language rich modeling.
Mm.
So instead of you have a car, hey Johnny, what color? What color? Instead of that, the car, you just start vroom, vroom. Maybe you have another one and then crash and oh, it fell. So instead of all the kind of quizzing, which
Mhm.
doesn't really teach anything, it's the modeling and the simple language that you can teach
Mm.
them with fun sounds and fun movements that are just so much more effective for them.
Okay, modeling sounds for starters.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I would, and before I taught a kid, a color red, that's kind of a boring word, right? I would use words like have an octopus and like bloop, 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 or the car, like vroom, vroom, fast, like fun words because they're
Mhm.
kids, right? They don't really
Right.
want to like recite colors. That's not so fun. Or
Yeah.
bubbles, like pop, 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 and like poke, poke, like fun ones, and really like fun language as opposed to just like say bubble, say bubble, like that's not
Yeah.
engaging. So that's not so fun. So that's something I think I've gotten much better at. And what I would tell parents, they can do that all the time at home. That's just playing with your kid in a
Mhm.
little bit of a different way.
Right. Start with sound first
Yeah.
and then build it up to words and then build
Yeah.
it to sentence formation, right?
Right. Exactly.
But we
Yeah.
start small.
Yeah. Start small and start fun. Like animal sounds are fun, things like that. So that's what I would kind of you know, encourage parents to do. And, if your kid likes playing in a certain way, instead of really changing that way right off the bat, right? We want to kind of build off that. So
Mhm.
they like doing certain stuff. We add sounds to that. We show them like, hey, I can have fun with this too. I can play with this too. And
Mhm.
that just gets so much farther doing that than just having like a regimented
Right.
kind of like protocol that you want them to say certain things.
Right. Or if they like bubbles, we can do buh for bubbles, right?
Yes. Exactly. Yep.
So how about for feeding? What's one practical exercise that parents can do at home with their kids?
So one maybe not the easiest, but practical is kind of, I mean, hopefully it is, but I just want parents to, for little kids, I want them to appreciate and understand how important hunger is. And
Mm,
like a lot of my kids, they do a lot of milk and formula, and we need those calories. I understand that, but to kind of space it out. If they're
yeah.
4, they shouldn't be eating all day, even if it's eating milk. So always like food first, offer food first, and then bottle. Have it in like 3 meals a day instead of all throughout the day.
Right.
Hunger is very, very important. And for the older kids, I would tell parents, understand this is likely coming from a place of anxiety.
Hmm.
right? And instead of just kind of, we don't want to shame anybody, we don't want to make anybody feel awful, right? Food choices don't define us. They shouldn't, right?
Right.
That's silly that we
Right.
think that. But so, just telling parents, it's really helpful if you can kind of just say to your kid, I know that eating's really hard for you. Like, acknowledge it. I get
Yeah.
it. Like, instead of just, you can do this, your brother eats all the time, or this is silly, or this is crazy. Like,
Right.
coming from a mindset of just, even if you don't truly believe it or understand it, saying to them, I understand this is really hard for you, but
Right.
you can do hard things. That's
Right.
kind of what we're the goal is for like the older
I
kids.
gotcha. Yeah. So like validating their feelings. It might
Yeah,
not
yeah.
be a big deal for us, but it is a big deal for them.
Right, right. I mean, odds are they don't want to be, even if they're not ready to change, they don't love dealing and thinking about food all the time either. It's not fun for them either.
Right.
So, kind of acknowledging that goes really, really far.
So you've shared so many techniques so far. If you
Good.
have to boil it down into one key piece of advice, like the golden nugget here, what would
Mhm.
that be for both feeding and speech?
So I think that for feeding, it would definitely be, don't underestimate the power of hunger and scheduling food, because
Mhm.
that sometimes is a really big chunk of it. You still will have to work on exposure and food chaining and all the other techniques that I can help you with, or you can help parents with, or, running away from the table or anything like that. But if we can at least maybe get that chunk at first taken care of, that can be extremely helpful. For speech, if we can just get in the mindset of all communication is positive, right? Anytime, even if your kid is crying, that's communication, right? So if we can shape it into something where they can be a little bit more effective with it,
Yeah.
and just thinking about verbalizations, that would be really, if I could get lots of parents to understand that, that would be really wonderful for me.
Yeah, yeah. I love that advice. I think that a lot of parents, if they can just hear this, it will change their mindset.
Yeah, I
And
would
it,
hope so.
yeah, and it could go so far if, if their mindset is changed, like, of course you want your kids to eat food, but you also need to like consider the anxiety, the emotions behind it too.
Hmm.
Changes are really hard.
Yeah,
Yeah.
really are. Yeah.
Right. And then communications. It's not always about verbal communications.
No.
We communicate with our body,
Hmm.
we communicate with eye contact, but
Hmm.
it means the communication is very important. And however way they can use to express their needs, help them do that.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's huge. Yeah, and I really think that when you look at kids and you work with them and you get to know your own child so much more, you understand what they are communicating, and that most kids are trying to communicate something to you
Yeah.
in
Even
one
when
way or
they are
another.
crying or
Yep. Yeah.
tantruming. Yeah.
Yep.
And I
Hmm.
see that a lot of kids, once they have their, functional communication resolved, they're so much happier.
It's like a light bulb goes on. It's like a world of difference. And that's what we want. We want our kids to be happy.
Got
A kid time is a time of happiness and play, and we want them to be able to do that.
it. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. Okay. Wow, this has been amazing, Kelley.
Oh, good. Yeah, this has been really nice. It's been nice talking it out too. It's very interesting, like thinking back on some success stories or some struggles I had when I was younger. Like, it's kind of nice to reflect on it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for sharing with me your story and sharing so many helpful techniques and strategies that parents can use. This is huge and your time is valuable. So thank you so much, Kelley.
Oh, no, thank you. This has been a really great experience for me too. Thank you.
Mhm. I'm sure that parents and educators who watch this video will want to reach out to you. So is it okay? And if they do want to reach out to you, then where can they reach you?
Sure. Yeah, I would love to. You can find me, my website is Food for Thought Therapy with the number 4 in the middle, or you can email me directly. It's Kelley at food for number 4 therapy.com.
That's awesome. And I'm going to put Kelley's details and contact information um, in the description under this video. So
Okay,
yeah, reach out to
cool.
Kelley,
Yay.
learn from her. She's
Okay, good. Looking forward to it.
Yes, Kelley is a great therapist. Thank you so much, Kelley.
Okay,
Yay! This is a really, really successful interview. I love it.
great. Thank you.